So, about a year ago, I became a father. And I thought I knew more or less how that was going to happen. A few weeks before the due date, my wife and I went to one of those soon-to-be parents classes at the hospital, where they tell you what to expect in some detail. There were 11 people in the room when we arrived, 5 other couples, and 1 woman by herself. That lone woman looked at us, noticed the wheelchair, and became extremely relieved. She was no longer the most unusual person in the room. We were all very anxious, and for the next few hours they walked us through the birthing process in some detail. They showed us the room we were going to be in, with the double bed and the pool and the big rubber ball. They showed us a model of a pelvis and a very realistic-looking baby doll. And by the end of it, we thought, okay, well, now we know what to expect. So, our son was born a week after his due date. That was the longest week of our lives. Everything became unreal once we'd passed the due date. Everything seemed very strange. It seemed like the pregnancy wasn't real, that we weren't going to have a baby. But of course we did. And of course what happened during the birth was nothing like what we'd expected. We thought we knew something, but we knew nothing. Still, on the 5th of May, 2016, we were back home, we were in our apartment, we had our baby with us, and he was perfect. Or was he? We were first-time parents, so we panicked. We didn't plan to, but we did. Regularly, several times a day. Is the baby breathing? Is the baby feeding properly? Is the baby crying because it's in pain? Should we be doing something we're not doing? Those questions seemed very reasonable to us during the first few weeks. And of course, in a way, they were reasonable. They're the kind of questions that help keep babies alive. And the baby kept being alive. And loud. But we kept asking questions. Of course, there were more experienced people we could ask, more experienced parents. But they didn't have our baby. So we looked everywhere for answers. This included the internet. Yeah, that is not always a good idea. But here's the thing. The internet may not have the right answers, but it does have a lot of them. And the internet is very sure of itself. It does not hesitate. There are apps, for instance, that have been downloaded millions of times because they can tell you exactly what's wrong with your baby. They can tell you that your baby is now crying because he is in the middle of his 2nd developmental leap, and it's going to be another 5 days until he calms down. There are even little icons showing stormy weather and sunny weather, so you'll know what to look for when the weather's going to change. But what if the weather doesn't change? Well, then there are 2 options. Either there is something wrong with the app, or there is something wrong with the baby. And this is what the insanity of early parenthood is like. In a certain sleep-deprived state of mind, it is easier to believe that there is something wrong with the baby and with yourself than with the app. Because the app does not question itself. The app does not have moments of doubt. The app just has its little sunny icon. So clearly the baby must be crying for no reason at all, and also you're a horrible parent. This went on for some time. Sometimes the baby was happy, sometimes the baby was unhappy, and as far as my wife and I could tell, there was no correlation at all between the icons on the app and the baby's actual moods. But he was feeding, and he was growing, and most importantly, he was still alive. Slowly, we became used to our new life. Slowly, we began to regain our minds. And having regained my mind, I remembered something. I'm an academic. It's part of my job to be critical. And when presented with new information, I always ask a few questions like, how do we know this? What's the source of this information? So I put those questions to the app, and that's where things got interesting. It presented me with a very scientific-looking surface, with solid developmental psychology, distinct developmental stages, and so on. But when I looked at the studies that had been carried out, the actual studies, it turned out that they had been done on very small sets of babies. Sometimes not human babies. Some of the earliest studies were carried out on baby chimpanzees. This was good to know. There was another fact about the app, which was even more obvious. It was just that we had been too sleep-deprived to notice. All of the predicted developmental stages, all of the stormy periods and sunny periods, were laid out based on one source of information, which was the baby's due date. One single data point. So we had to ask ourselves, who knows the baby best? This app, which knows one single thing about him and a few more things about baby chimpanzees? Or us, his parents, who have spent 24 hours a day with him since he was born? We asked ourselves that question, and then we deleted the app. We like to monitor ourselves, just like we like to monitor our babies. We use our Fitbits and phones and tracking sites to monitor our financial behavior and our browsing habits, and perhaps most importantly, our health. And I'm as fascinated by the opportunities we have as anyone. I've downloaded an app, for instance, which uses the accelerometer on my phone to count the number of steps I take per day. As it turns out, it's fewer than the app thinks I should take. Well, I do walk, as it happens, just not that much. The recommended number of steps per day is 10,000, and I average about 2,000. Well, after the baby was born, I walked back and forth quite a bit, bringing my wife food and snacks and water while she was breastfeeding, taking out the garbage, doing the laundry, doing pretty much everything I could do to help while she did the thing that only she could do. So make it 3,000 steps a day, although I didn't have time to count them. And after about 6 months of this, I'd lost 10 pounds. So in my case, it seems like 3,000 steps was quite a lot. Now, I can hear the app developer giving the only logical response, which is that we did not build this for wheelchair users who can walk a little. And that's a fair point. I'm not the average user. And if average means the same thing as normal, then I'm not normal either. But how many of us are? Really? The health apps, the tracking sites, they present us with a very confident surface, and they don't often let us look under the hood. So, in using them, we surrender some of our judgment. We do this for the best possible reason. We want to be better. We want to be perfect versions of ourselves. But the question I keep returning to is, do these tools help us become perfect versions of ourselves? Or of somebody else? The perfect baby has perfectly predictable stormy spells and sunny spells. The perfect baby has perfectly predictable developmental stages. The perfect baby also doesn't exist. Leo Tolstoy wrote in Anna Karenina that all unhappy families are unhappy in their own way. And I think we can go a bit further than that. Every actually existing baby is a baby in its own way. For years now, I've worked in an academic field called disability studies. And disability studies began as the study of people who were different from others in their bodies, in their minds. But over time, disability scholars became more interested in the reasons why people are seen as being very different from others. Why is it, for instance, that we attach so much more importance to having an extra finger or missing a finger than we do to variations in eye color? Well, one answer has to do with how gloves are made. It's not that easy to find gloves for hands with 6 fingers, for the same reason that they don't make step-counting apps for wheelchair users who can walk a little. Disability studies also questions the ideals that we make for ourselves, for our bodies, and for our minds. We all want to be better, healthier, more productive. We want to be perfect. But real perfection lies beyond us. We remain mortal. We have a limited amount of time on this planet. That makes it important to choose our goals carefully, to not surrender our judgment. Because there are some goals that we shouldn't try to reach. In my case, I couldn't walk 10,000 steps every day. I could manage it, possibly, for a day or two, but I would damage myself in the process. Because my equilibrium lies at a different level. My son didn't follow his developmental stages exactly as the app had predicted. But he's a little over a year now, and he's healthy, and he's happy, except when he isn't. During our first year as parents, there were a lot of things that my wife and I didn't do. We didn't stick to strict napping schedules. We didn't stick to strict feeding schedules. During those first, most vulnerable months, we didn't try to train our baby. We didn't try to build a better baby. We tried to get to know the one we had. He may not be perfect. He may not even be perfectly normal. But he is himself. And that is more than enough. Thank you.